This is Drawing Me Out with Bill Willingham. I'm Bill Willingham. This is a first experimental episode to see if this turkey can learn to fly. This episode will be about breaking into comics, because that is the question I am most asked by people interested in my profession. How does one break into comics? Before we begin, here are a few things that are on the drawing board, the series drawing board, as in work I'm doing for work that needs to be completed. This is a color sketch of a cover for a novel I wrote called Just Another Rancor. This might have been the cover, except I didn't like the way it was going, so now it's officially a color sketch. And then this is the cover in progress. I've decided to do it more into my comfort zone of inks with colors. As you can see, it's not done yet. Just Another Rancor is a novel I wrote and put online for readers to try out when 2/3 of it was done. And then for a long time, I did not complete that final third. Well, the final third is done, and all that's left to have the novel fully posted for readers is for me to finish this cover painting. You can see the progress. When it's done, then Just Another Rancor will be published and available. This is another book cover I'm working on. I'm not going to talk about it other than it's in progress. And this I'm doing in a more painterly kind of thing. We'll see if that works out. That leads us to today's drawing. Now what's going to happen is we're going to talk. That's what the purpose of these videos are, is for me to chat about things I know about the business I've spent 40 years in. But I don't like videos of just looking at someone's face as they talk, although there's plenty of interesting faces out there. Mine is not. Mine is a face built for radio. So I thought instead, while I jabber on about things that are interesting to me and hopefully interesting to you, I would do a sketch. And for this first sketch, I drew a couple of issues of a book called Shadow Pact, which I also wrote for many issues. But I drew the first 2 issues. And I found that in doing so, my favorite character to draw, you'd think it's the monkey, especially with the last work you've seen. But it's not. I enjoyed Ragman, which is this fellow right here. So I thought I would do, while we spoke, a Ragman sketch. And then when this video is done, and hopefully the sketch is done, my pal Brad, who's also the producer of these videos, will put that sketch up on eBay and see if we can make enough to cover the expenses of doing this video. Say hello, Brad. Brad is also on the mic.
I am. I'm hiding behind the camera because I indeed have a face for radio as well. Moreover, a voice for radio. So,
yeah. So breaking into comics. Brad, what do people want to know about breaking into comics?
The thing I always ran into, because I was also a letterer and now a title designer, a logo designer. How do you get it into the right people's hands? I mean, when we met, we've known each other, over almost 30 years, over 30 years?
Jeez.
And I was breaking in at that time as a letterer. It's how do you get it into someone's hand if you think your craft is ready to go? Okay.
Well, that is a good question, and that is the crux of the question, as we will see. Breaking into comics. I've been in this business, as I said, for 40 years. No 2 people break into comics the same way. So that's the first thing you need to know, is your method of breaking into comics is not going to be the same as the next guy's method of breaking in the comics. That said, there's a few things you should learn to do and a few things you should learn not to do. The first thing I want to say about breaking into comics is, for the first time in the last 10 years or so, you don't really need to break anything to break into comics. And what I mean by that is it's not really a caper where you get in because you have flummoxed some other poor guy's ability to get in. My first art job was with TSR Hobbies, the makers of Dungeons and Dragons. And I needed to break into that in the sense that it was between me and one other artist as to who was going to get hired for the one open position. So the art director, Dave Sutherland, fine fellow, basically made it a contest between the two of us. Meaning, in addition to the art we had done over our lives and showed him to get to this stage, he gave us a list of things to draw and a couple of days in which to draw. And the genius of that is that one of the things that comic editors, which is really your audience, your target in breaking into comics, one of the things they want to look for is not only can you draw well in the samples you provided, but once you get the job, are you going to be able to do it in a timely basis? And timely basis for comics is quick. You must be able to draw well and often and get the assignment done. So he gave us these assignments, and I beat the guy. I used to try and follow his career afterwards because I felt bad that I won out over him. Not bad enough to bow out, obviously. But he didn't take it well, and so I followed his career for a while. And since then, I've forgotten it. I don't think he went very far. But anyway, I actually broke someone's ability to get the job he wanted in order to get in. And nowadays, you don't necessarily have to do it. There are so many comic opportunities because with online publishing and the just inexpensive methods of print publication, anyone who wants to do comics can do comics. It is really your desire that will either make you succeed or fail. That said, let's say that you want to write Spider-Man, and that's all you want to do, or you want to draw Batman. Anyone who wants to can do comics, but anyone who wants to cannot necessarily do a character owned by another agency, which in this case is Marvel or DC Comics. They are the big publishers still. In order to write your wonderful Spider-Man opus or draw your perfect Batman that you've been dying to all your life, you need to get into either Marvel or DC Comics. That's the breaking in part. You don't really need to break anything there either, but you need their permission to go ahead and do it if you want your work to get published. At that point, it's two different jobs depending on whether you want to break in as a writer or as an artist, and we'll discuss both. Are you with me so far, Brad?
I'm right there with you.
Okay. Brad is going to break in at any time for clarification and or just purposes of discussion.
Well, I did have a question about that. You were talking
Okay.
about, wanting to do Batman or Spider-Man, you have to go to the big guys, and that makes perfect sense. When you see people who are wanting to, and there's always air quotes anytime I use the term break in, just like, you were mentioning.
Yeah.
How many people have their own idea, and if they had the gumption and the wherewithal, could just tell their own story? I mean, is it a larger percentage wanting to go to the big guys, or is there a percentage of folks really wanting to tell their own story?
I think it used to be a larger percentage that definitely wants to be a Marvel or DC Comics producer. These days, I would suggest that maybe that's changed. That now people want to do their personal story idea a little more quirky, a little more self-driven. But seriously, if that's what you want to do, and you want to break into comics in that way, congratulations, you've broken in. You haven't actually broken anything, you're in. If you were waiting for official permission, and I can understand how sometimes that's nice for someone to acknowledge you and say, yes, you've made it. Well, here it is. Your official permission is you're good. You're into comics.
Awesome. So their certificates will be in the mail from you shortly.
Yeah, they're non-certificates. Yeah.
Okay.
And you know what? That kind of is important. Like I said too many times before already, I've been in this business for a while. I still think like I may be able to make it into comics someday. And I think part of that reason that I don't really think like I've quite gotten there is there really was no point at which someone has said, congratulations, Bill, you're in comics now.
The official rite of passage never occurred. There was never a ceremony where you moved the tassel from one side to the other.
There was never a ceremony. That is true. Rites of passage are very important in any culture. And in the modern American culture, we have very few of them. Like in Judaism, you become an adult when you have your bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. We don't have the equivalent of that in the sort of the generic American culture. The closest thing we have really is high school graduation, and even that isn't quite congratulations, my son, you are a man today. Perhaps it should be, but not. So it would be nice on one level to have someone who can officially say, congratulations, you are part of comics. On the other hand, it would be terrible to give that power to someone when in actuality you should be the only one to be able to decide that.
It's back to a discussion we've had before about gatekeepers, and
right.
No one should be a gatekeeper for this when it is so easy for someone who wants to tell their story to tell it.
There are gatekeepers who can keep you out of Marvel and or DC, as we've discussed. There are no gatekeepers that can keep you out of comics. Or rather, there are gatekeepers, but the wall between those gates no longer exists. So if you don't want to deal with that gatekeeper standing in front of the gate, just walk around them, because the wall is no longer there. Now, artists and writers have two different, from now on, let's assume you are trying to get into Marvel or DC or some existing publishing company wanting to use their characters. Artists and writers have two different paths and they are completely different. Let's take artists first. In one sense, artists have it so much easier over writers to break in, and I'll tell you why. Most of the time you're trying for a job, you've either shown up at the offices, which they discourage you doing anymore. They used to allow it. Or...
Is this where I joined comics?
Yes, it really was. Or you get some editor to look at your samples at a convention. That's really the most common way now. Now, every big entertainment industry has people whose sole purpose is to weed out the ones that aren't ready, so that the big real decision makers aren't distracted with a lot of amateur work. They only look at what someone has decided is good enough to be worth consideration. Unfortunately, the comic industry has never been big enough to allow those kinds of hires. So in the comic industry, when you break in, you need to get the attention of an editor. The editor. When I broke in, I thought the art director of Marvel Comics was who you got art jobs from. It makes sense because when I went to work for TSR, I was hired by the art director of TSR. If you get advertising work, and I got a little bit of it before then, you went to an art director. So I looked up the art director of Marvel Comics, which was John Buscema. John Romita. And John Romita Sr. For you kids out there, there's a John Romita Jr. There's a wonderful artist. But it was his dad. And he was the art director of Marvel Comics. What I didn't understand is the art director of Marvel Comics does all the in-house production work. The ads, remember those Hostess comic book ads and things like this? And they do production drawings of Spider-Man for some advertisement or a toy line or things like that.
Oh, I do remember seeing those. The single page comic strip that ends up being about the product instead.
Yes. So he was the art director for that. I did not understand that. I sent him a bunch of samples. I was in Wisconsin at TSR at the time. And he responded. And the first thing he says is, I'm not really the guy to send these to because of all the reasons I just mentioned. But here's all my critiques about what you've done. I sent in 6 pages. I was able to find out that when you sent in sample pages, you sent in 6. Because fewer than that, they don't see enough of your ability to draw spread over many works. More than that, and that's just too much work for someone to go through. So 6 pages, and that's still the rule. If you take any rules from this, that's one of the few that still matters. So I sent in my 6 sample pages, and it being Marvel, I sent in 6 Avengers pages. And he got me on the phone and proceeded to tell me everything that was right and everything that was wrong with my samples, even though that was not his job. He was a production guy, and it was editors that needed to do that. But he gave me not only the time of day, but the time of many days working with that. And I took his notes, came up with 6 more pages, sent them to him in the next couple of days with all the changes and additions he was talking about. I didn't redraw the samples I had done. I did whole new pages. He called me up and said no one had ever done that before. That no one had ever like just turned around pages based on that before. And that was when I began to get an inkling that that is one of the things they're looking for, is not only can someone take direction, but can he produce pages fast enough to work in this business? You will not believe it, because I have a reputation for being so slow in art, and I am now. But I used to be the go-to guy when you needed something done quickly. Anyway, that's how I broke in at Marvel, not knowing that you submit your stuff to editors. Artists, don't do that. Submit your stuff to editors, not art directors or, just someone who is at a convention wearing a Marvel badge, so he must be someone that can give you a job. He's not, she's not, unless it's an editor, and unless it's an editor looking for work.
What is a good, is there a standard speed? How fast should an artist, especially if, again, looking to break in, if their pace, if you take an 8-panel page and it takes you 3 days versus an 8-panel page and you can crank it out in a few hours, is there a good pace, a bad pace?
Jack Kirby, on a regular basis, could produce 3 good pages of comic art a day. That is a phenomenal pace. John Byrne used to be able to do it. No one else can that I know of. 3 pages a day, and it doesn't matter if your art looks like it was drawn with a stick. You're going to get work, because they like someone who can produce a lot of work quickly. And that's what comic work is, the ability to produce a lot of work quickly. If you cannot on a regular basis do a page a day, you're going to produce just a touch over 20 pages a month. That is about the pages of a comic book. You need to produce a single issue of a comic book every month. So if you can't produce 1 page a day of good comic work, my advice to you, and I mean this sincerely, and I'm not being, tough hombre, get out of here kid. My advice to you is seriously reconsider your choice to do this work. If you can't produce an entire issue a month, you're going to have trouble building an audience, because a month between issues is just about the maximum amount of time a readership is going to wait to see their regular fix of whoever you are, the artist, on whatever book you're drawing. 6 pages of samples done a page a day is your guideline on whether or not you're ready even to try to interest someone in your work. Now, the advantage the artist has over the writer is, let's say you've sweated, built your 6 pages, they're 6 wonderful pages, and you've gotten an editor to look at them. An editor, or anyone, is going to know right away whether or not you can do the work, because drawings are instant in the sense of comprehending, taking them in. You don't have to read a page of drawing the way you do like a page of comic script, for example. This is why comic books were the very first language, the very first written language. We're talking about the cave paintings, which were graphic images set in a sequence in order to tell a story. That is the definition of comic art. And that is why art will always be the one universal language. You don't need to speak French to understand a page drawn by a French artist. You don't need to speak Nepalese, is that actually their language, to understand a page of art drawn by a Nepalese artist. Now, if the page also comes with text, with word balloons or whatever, you would need to know the language there. But you have that language already inside you. That is the advantage the artist has over the writer. An editor, 2 or 3 minutes into looking at your samples, will know whether or not you can draw. The next thing you will have to do, and let's say you impressed her. She just loves you and your drawing ability. Said, you're going to get some work right now. Chances are, the first work you're going to get, it's not going to matter whether or not you fail to get that work in. You're going to get a job where if you drop the ball and it doesn't happen, all that's going to happen for them is going to say, okay, so that guy cannot get the work done. Now, thank you, because a lot of my early comic book drawing was done when someone was going to do it, couldn't get the work done, crapped out, and then the editor picked up the phone to me and said, look, I need an issue of this done quickly. Can you do it? And I said, yes, I can. So thank you very much, those of you that screwed up and didn't finish your jobs. But that aside, you should gauge yourself whether or not you really can get this done. Drawing comics is hard, and the reason it's hard is not any particular image or any particular page. Those are problems you can solve. The reason it's hard is you've got to spend a day producing a page of comics, the best page of which you were capable, making it wonderful, go to bed, get up the next morning and do it all over again. And then do that same task over and over and over again every day, day in, day out, taking the days off that you're going to take off. And you need to be able to do that for the next 40 years or so, depending on how long you want to be a comic artist. That's how, assuming you can get an editor's attention, and like I said, the best way that I know of is at a convention. That's how an artist gets work. For a writer, it's tougher. I have an editor, or had an editor, who once confessed to me that she just doesn't like to read. It horrified me. At the time, I was unable to figure out what to say to that until I was able to process it. And I realized what she was really telling me, because for one thing, I knew she liked to read. She was we often discuss books we liked and things like that. What she really meant, the context in which she was admitting it, was she doesn't like to read for work because there's so much bad work being attempted. People sending scripts in. There's no script you can plop down in front of an editor and he or she will know within moments, the way an artist, whether or not you're a good writer. That script actually needs to be read. And reading like that is a chore. Remember those big publishers and big media people that have people to read through the chaff to separate the wheat from the chaff? Comic people can't really afford that. Sometimes at a convention, if they've set up a system for people to put in submissions, they will hire someone for that convention to try and sort through the crap and look for the good stuff. But other than that, comic folks are not like movie or novel people that have what they call slush readers. The slush reader reads through everything that's submitted and separates out the stuff that she thinks is good enough to bring to the attention of an actual editor who might be interested in that project. Editors have so much work to do because in comics they also traffic the books, which means they make sure pages get from the penciler to the letterer to the inker to the colorist. They set up, schedules for printing and distribution and all this. They've got so much work that reading through piles of slush script submissions is not their cup of tea. So what she was really telling me was, I hate that kind of reading. That kind of knowing 90% of what I pick up is going to be terrible. Lots of people submit work not realizing it's not very good.
You mentioned the 6-page rule for the artists. 6 pages of comic art, no more, no less. Is there, for a submission for writers, what are you submitting? Are you submitting a brief synopsis of an episode an issue plus, the actual plot for that issue? What do you turn into an editor to try and get your point across?
That is a good question. And it varies. And the answer is none of the above, probably. And that's the reason what I'm getting at is that in this slush reading, mostly the big two won't even look at your unsolicited submission anymore. As a matter of fact, at one point, DC, may have been Marvel too, but I'm more familiar with DC. They said, we're just no longer ever going to take those submissions. You can no longer just send in story ideas for us to consider. The reason being that there's just too many people doing that. There's also a hidden problem with looking at art samples versus looking at writing samples. Let's say your writing sample is the perfect pitch for like a Batman comic. It actually is a great idea for a Batman comic. You send it in, you have no idea if anyone's looked at it, but somewhere down the line, a Batman comic comes out with something very close to your idea. Well, publishers get sued a lot for that. I mean, a lot. Sometimes with art samples. Once when I was working in the art department of TSR, the Dungeons and Dragons people, I was looking at this art submission that came in that was clearly drawn by a Mattel's Mighty Men and Monster Maker. Remember that toy?
Yes.
It was a set of templates that you would put together, like these are torsos, these are arms, These are heads. And you put these templates in and then trace them and come up with different mighty men and monsters depending on what combination of templates you used. These still even had the Mattel imprint in the paper because those templates actually,
right.
Have some some depth to them. And the fellow sent the submission in with all sorts of characters made by this Mattel Mighty Men and Monster Maker with a letter that says, you better not rip off my ideas or I will sue you so much. Now, those submissions made the rounds at TSR, and we even had them up on the bulletin board for a while. They were very amusing. But needless to say, that guy did not get hired. And we did our part. We were very judicious. We never used any of his ideas for our work. Now, with writing samples, something you suggest might be too close to something they finally do, because there are only so many Batman premises out there. Chances are your great idea was very close to ideas that many others were having. As a result, publishers tend to stop reading the moment they begin to suspect that you're about to pitch an idea to them for one of their books. During my long run writing fables, fans, very well-meaning fans, and thank you very much for that, would occasionally suggest, oh, we should use this character or whatever. Now, I had to stop reading the moment I would recognize that some kind of suggestion like that was forthcoming. Because what if I did eventually use that fairy tale character that I was planning on using someday all along? I have no money per se. I can't afford to get sued just because I did something similar to an idea someone else had. So as a result, to protect myself, I made it clear to all people that were going to send me letters or emails or what have you, that the moment I detect some kind of suggestion as to a character or a story idea I might use, I will stop reading. And I will never use those suggestions. The reason one has to do that is just to protect against that inevitable lawsuit. And you think, well, that can't happen too often with lawsuits. You would be surprised. There are some litigious people out there, especially since with a big corporation, sometimes that big corporation will just give you a little money to get you to go away. There are people who make a living out of dropping pest lawsuits to go away. So now you writers, you're facing that problem. You want to get in, but no one is going to read your suggestions, your submissions, with the rare exception of occasionally DC, I remember, would do it once in a while, where they would specifically at a convention solicit your story script ideas. You would actually not even submit them to a person. There was a slot inside the DC booth that you would feed your suggestion into. And Paul Levitz was still the DC head honcho at the time. And I said, Paul, this is a wonderful idea, but please, 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 let me do this little, hook up a sound dingy thingy. I'm very technological. So that as people put their suggestions into the slot, it kicks off, it breaks a photoelectric barrier, and it kicks off a sound of a paper shredder. Just, wow. I thought that would be very funny. But it was very weird that throughout that convention, the people were putting their suggestions through that slot surreptitiously, like someone making a drug deal at a crack house. It was very fun to watch. So I thought the paper shredder sound effect would have heightened that experience everywhere. Because people will then look around after they've done it. And I know what they suspected. They suspected, like, did I just drop it directly into the trash can that, they've got inside that booth there? And the answer is no, because in that case, they had someone read through these submissions, and then they posted a list of, these people, of all the ones that submitted, which were hundreds, these people can get a face-to-face meeting at such and such a day during this convention.
Oh, that's nice.
That was nice, but they never did it again because my guess is that there was just too much to wade through.
So other than the mystery slot at a random convention you happen to be at, is there, literally something you can say, hey, I'm a writer, here's what I do?
Yes. Now, granted, it's been 40 years since I broke in.
Air quotes.
Air quotes. And I've already mentioned everyone breaks in differently than everyone else. And I got to write comics simply because I started out drawing comics and got tired of getting bad scripts that took too much effort to draw. So I started making that a condition. Like, can I, if I draw this, can I write this? That type of thing. And that worked. So I kind of got in the back door. These days, and I hope this does not come... No, it is going to come as bad news, and I apologize. The way to break in as a writer is to write something and get it published. Write anything. Write a movie, write a novel, write someone else's comic book. Write it, get it published, so that when you come to said editor, you can plop it down and say, this is something I wrote. And you have the one advantage of, well, it may be crap, and it might, but at least someone else was willing to publish it. Movies, seriously, I wrote this movie. Plop, here's a DVD of it. An editor may plop your movie in just to see if it's well written. An editor may read a few pages of a novel just to see if it's written well enough. More likely, you wrote a novel and you come up and introduce yourself to an editor at the show, and the editor says, I read that. I love that work. Or I read some of it. It wasn't my cup of tea. But that is how you're going to break in as a writer now, except for all of the exceptions, which I can't cover. When I was drawing Ragman, one of the things I decided to do, I liked a lot of the versions of Ragman that have been drawn before, but they never did draw individual rags. They sort of did lines and stuff to suggest different rags. I swore, and I apologize to the colorist and the inkers when I got my work inked, that had to recreate all these individually drawn rags. But Ragman had a suit of rags. They were enchanted rags. Each rag represented an individual lost soul.
Spoiler.
Yeah. And by God, I was going to draw each and every rag. And I enjoyed doing it. One thing I didn't do was make sure I drew the same rags in the same position in every pose, because one of the premises of this character is that these enchanted rags are always in some kind of weird Brownian motion, fighting for a place of precedence or something. I don't know. But at least I didn't have to draw all the rags identical in the same thing. During my short run on Coventry, which I drew and wrote, when I did a brick wall or a stone wall that our hero Claudia Nevermore lived in, the next time I showed that wall, all the stones were the exact same ones.
I was about to say they're going to have to hire a continuity editor just for your Ragman episodes.
Yep. That's one thing I enjoy. I enjoyed drawing this character. It was no chore because I liked it. And I got to tell you something. Finding something as an artist that you want to draw that you like, hold on to those moments, because sometimes they can be few and far between.
given the industry and how it works and how a comic book is made, sometimes it's kind of like, making sausage. You don't want to watch it, but sure enough, that final product is amazing. Which of the jobs in putting a comic book out there is the easiest, is probably or might be the easiest to get into? I mean, coloring, lettering, editing, writing, penciling, inking. I mean, there's just a lot of work goes into it that a lot of folks don't realize.
Well,
so there could be a spot for someone who's not a writer or not an artist to still work in comics.
Here's something that probably still holds true today. Most people who get their first job creating a comic will get their first job based on someone else screwed up. And now they need something done, not just well, but now. As I said, many of the jobs I got in the drawing part of my career, especially with DC Comics, were someone didn't come through, and so an editor picked up the phone and said, "Can you do an issue of this and do it quickly?" You want to be the guy they think of when the chips are down and they need someone right away. There's a trick to that I can't tell you because it's a different trick for every person. You want to make yourself well enough known to an editor so that you are who they think of when they need you. But you can't be so obnoxious that they won't give you the job because they're tired of hearing from you. You have to let your editor, your target editor, know that you're still alive, still out there, still wanting work. But you can't make a pest of yourself. There's a fellow working in the industry. I'm not going to name him because it's not a compliment, but his name has now become a code name for, have you gotten, let's say Smith. Have you gotten Smithed this week? Because he used to call for work every single editor at every single publisher so often that it really did become a truncated form for the pest. Now, the weird thing is he does actually get lots of work because he's really good at the job he was looking for, which I'm not going to reveal. But the sadness of actually becoming a name brand for being a pest, that's not a good thing.
And what happens when Mr. Smith gets the call from every single editor, from every single publisher going, "Excellent, we can use you right now"?
I don't know that ever happened, but I suspect, since he was not only good but quick, that he took all those jobs and found some way to make it work. He was a hustler. Nice. Don't be that guy. Even though I just said that sometimes he got work. No one likes that guy. But if you can, from time to time, let the editor know that you're wanting work. So that when work comes along, you are the name that someone thinks of. No guarantee, but it helps.
That's a lot of information for a short period of time.
Yeah. That pretty much covers it for this video. Like I said, there's no definitive way to break into comics. If you found a way that works, wonderful. If it seems like a way that might work again, do someone a favor. If you see a good artist or a writer out there and stuff, like, let them know your secret.
If you got something that worked for you, whether it's indies, whether it's majors, leave it in the comments below. That way everyone can kind of get a look and see what's going on.
Yeah.
All right. Any parting words? I think we'll kind of run a fast forward for the rest of the sketch, and everyone can see it when it's done.
Yeah. My parting words are this. In the comments below, if we do more of these videos, let us know the kind of subjects you would like to see covered. If you have specific questions, let us know specific questions that you would like to see addressed. If you have a specific request for what sketch will be done during these talks, add that as well. Thank you very much. See that big red angry subscribe button? I think it's red.
Yeah, I think everyone now says like, subscribe, share. You know, it starts to sound like an infomercial by the end of it. So.
Yeah, please do.
Right.
Please do subscribe. Please do tell your friends. This series, if it becomes a series, is not sponsored currently. It's not making money. Although we're going to make a little bit of money because Brad is going to put this finished sketch, almost finished, I'll finish it up here, on eBay for auction to whomever wants this Ragman sketch.
Awesome. So the last few minutes will be kind of a fast forward of Bill finishing up the sketch, and we'll see you guys next time.